Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite, or whatever the case may be. My name is Marcus, and I am the host of the Black Brazil Today blog, as well as the Black Brazil Today YouTube page, where I discuss Brazil from the perspective of race. Now, today I will be revisiting an article I did little less than a year ago, September of 2021. The article is entitled Raça Brasil, Brazil's longest running magazine targeting the Afro-Brazilian population, celebrates 25 years. I still remember when I first became aware of this magazine, it was just another piece in my discovery of Black Brazil. So I just wanted to go through a little bit with this because it was really a landmark in the rise of Black Brazilian media. So just a note, reaching 25 years is always an accomplishment, whether we're talking about a marriage, some record-breaking sports feat, or a business. 25 years means longevity, great planning, the ability to adjust to changes experienced along a path, trust, and overcoming of challenges. All of these definitions could likely apply to the magazine Raça Brasil, which recently reached the 25-year plateau. The appearance of Raça Brasil back in September of 1996 should be seen as the launching pad for today's growing Black Brazilian media presence. Today, because of Black media, the demands of Brazil's Black community can no longer be ignored, and this is evident in the rise of countless influential Afro-Brazilians in areas such as advertising, the fashion world, social networks, and business. I can personally attest to the importance and influence of the magazine, as its rise and prominence firmly go hand in hand with my own entry into the world of Black Brazil at the end of the year 1999. I've told the story several times, but it's worth mentioning again with the context, or within the context of the 25 years of Raça Brasil magazine. My purchase of the Africana Encyclopedia on Christmas Eve of 1999 set me on a path of discovery of Brazil's hidden Black history and the experiences of African descendants in Brazilian society today. I still remember how I became aware of the publication. With the coming of the year 2000, I had been surfing the internet for only about a year and a half at that time. And some kind of way, I ended up meeting a young lady online who lived in New York. I remember communicating with her through an email address I had with the old Netscape Navigator at the time. We exchanged a few emails discussing our interests in Brazil, and she would eventually tell me that she had already visited Rio de Janeiro and was planning on going back. Our exchanges took place before my own trip to Salvador Bahia in the country's northeast back in late August of 2000. Over the course of these e-convos, she asked me if I had ever heard of Raça Brasil magazine, a sort of Brazilian Ebony magazine. After I told her that I'd never heard of it, she told me that she had picked up a couple of copies of the magazine while in Rio and would be willing to send them to me through the mail. Having never heard of the magazine, I was filled with anticipation and appreciative that a person who was basically a stranger was doing this favor for me. In less than a week, I received an envelope at my home in Detroit, Michigan. Opening the envelope, I found 4 issues of Raça Brasil magazine. Looking at the beautiful smiling faces on the covers, I was immediately enamored. Similar to the sentiment I felt after reading in the Africana Encyclopedia that Brazil was home to anywhere from 53 to 120 million people of African descent, I again thought to myself, how is it that Brazil has so many Black people and I had never heard of this? Side note, obviously, when you see such a span, a difference in the estimated population of Black Brazilians being between 53 and 120 million, what would explain that huge gap? That's like a difference of like almost 70 million people. Like, what explains that difference? Well, that's what you come across just when you're dealing with the complexity of trying to categorize and classify which of Brazil's now more than 210, 15 million people, would be classified as Black. That's a whole nother topic. I'll be getting into that, and that's a topic that I talk much, a whole lot about on my YouTube page as well as on the blog. So during my introduction to Brazil, I can say that there were several moments in my mind that told me that I needed to get a passport and visit this country. Coming in first and second place would be the books Africans in Brazil and Brazil, Mixture or Massacre by the legendary Afro-Brazilian activist Abdias do Nascimento. Next, I would say came the music, starting with the song Cocovado by João Gilberto, the CDs Brasileiro and Brazil Blue on the Putumayo and Blue Note record labels, respectively, and the samba soul band Banda Black Rio. The arrival of those Raça Brasil magazines simply sealed the deal. One of the covers of the 4 issues I received in the mail featured the actresses Isabel Filarges and Thais Araújo, who, up to that point, I had never heard of. It wasn't the idea that they looked in any way different from the African-American women I was familiar with growing up in the United States, but just the fact that these were our Afro-Brazilian cousins. Flipping through the issues of the magazine I received, they immediately struck me as a sort of mixture, better yet, the magazine struck me as somewhat of a mixture between Ebony and Essence magazines. Attractive, smiling Black Brazilian faces in middle-class settings that promote consumption, fashion, hair, and beauty tips. The latest in music, culinary arts, features on Afro-Brazilian historical figures, and reports on being Black in Brazil. One other thing I would add to that is there was a healthy dosage of articles about what's going on with Black people in other countries, particularly African Americans. The success of Hassa even reached the pages of New York Times, which printed a story on the magazine in October of 1996. An immediate hit, the magazine's first edition sold out, causing its publisher to rush order another 100,000 copies to the newsstands. For Hassa's first editor-in-chief, Araldo Macedo, the success debunked 3 accepted myths in Brazil's editorial market. 1, that Blacks had little purchasing power. 2, that Afro-Brazilians were ashamed of their race. And 3, that a magazine for Blacks could achieve success in terms of sales. The emergence of the new glossy magazine was the first step of the publishing market recognizing the estimated 60% of Brazilians who were either Black or brown. It's as if these 90 million people were invisible, said Macedo at the time, adding that this applied not only for magazines, but also for advertising, fashion, films, and all media sectors. It's important to point out here that one of the main reasons that this magazine was snatched up so quickly on the newsstands is, as I have pointed out, repeatedly along the way of the blog, and just discussing this topic with almost anybody who asked me, you just didn't see representations of many Black Brazilians in print media in Brazil. That's the same with televised media. You just didn't. It was almost like the reality of what people saw in Brazil and then what you saw on magazine covers and on television, they were like a conflicting idea, because print media and televised media, the movies, you generally saw people who looked like they were mostly of European descent. So the release of Raça Brasil presented depictions of Afro-Brazilians and the image of Afro-Brazilians that they had been starving to see for literally decades, since, print media really took off in Brazil. So I know over a course of time, there were literally probably between, I don't know, maybe 6 to 12 magazines on newsstands in the United States that were targeted at the African-American population. This is not something that you saw in Brazil. It's like you saw Raça Brasil, and it was this one magazine that featured Black faces in a sea of white faces that were depicted on the rest of Brazil's print media, magazine covers. So with the goal of raising the self-esteem of Black Brazilians, the magazine's first issue features stories on the music of Bahian percussion groups, interracial marriages, and the manifestations of the Afro-Brazilian religion known as Candomblé. The magazine correctly pointed out that race was a delicate issue in Brazil, with cordial relations between races having played a significant role in the construction of the image of the country as a so-called racial democracy. The few Blacks who occupied important positions in government and in top management posts of successful companies supported the opinion of many that Brazil's famed racial democracy was, in fact, a myth. A good example of the difficulty in fighting this myth was the way comments by the then Minister of Sports, soccer legend Pelé, were interpreted. Earlier that year, the superstar suggested that Blacks vote for Black candidates to increase their influence in politics. The comments generated reaction among white politicians who accused the minister of promoting racial division in the country. This difficulty in facing the issue of race and racism remains today, but clearly on a lower level than previous decades. Like Ebony in essence, Raça Brasil was not without its flaws, as in some ways it presented a more idealistic representation or presentation of Black Brazil. Similar to Ebony, Hassa seemed to want to present the image of a quote unquote new Black Brazilian to offset the negative portrayals and invisibility of Black Brazilians in the country's mainstream media. It was a great, but in ways misleading portrayal that didn't prepare me for the reality of being Black in Brazil that I would discover through a brief friendship with two Black Brazilian men I met on that first trip to Salvador, as well as my own observations and research. After that first trip, my yearly return to Brazil would become a sort of a ritual. I would land in Sao Paulo's Guarulhos airport and ride the bus to the Congonhas airport to catch a connection flight to Bahia. For the first 5 years, the soundtrack for that bus ride included the likes of American hip hop artists such as Mos Def, Talib Kweli, Mobb Deep, and Pharoah Monch. Whenever I landed in Guarulhos, I always spent some time at the airport's bookstore to pick up the latest issue of Hassa. The magazine always stood out on Brazil's newsstands, as it was usually the only magazine of dozens that featured Black faces. Although much of the magazine seemed to focus on material in the mega city of Sao Paulo, it also featured reports on and from other states, notably Bahia, Minas Gerais, and Rio de Janeiro. Even with its flaws, I was happy to see Raça Brasil. Not only did it bring a Black representation that was sorely lacking in Brazil's print media, it was also able to capture the pulse of Black Brazilian life to a certain degree. Again, while it was clearly influenced by magazines such as Essence and Ebony, as it was a Brazilian magazine, there was one difference that struck me as I continued to snatch up copies of the magazine. Although it's customary to find ads featuring white people in any magazine, one thing I noted in Hassa that one would never find in Ebony or Essence were ads featuring Black men and women shown in romantic settings with white women and white men. For those first 5 years, I wasn't familiar with the topic that Black Brazilian women would later define as palmitagem. But mixed race couples were not rare in the magazine's pages, and considering the country's history, it shouldn't have been surprising. If one were to judge from the magazine's pages, you wouldn't have any idea that there was a segment of the population that saw such couples as problematic. Again, I would only learn that years later. Since at least the 80s, there have been several attempts to create a magazine targeting Brazil's Black population, including magazines such as Ebony and 100% Negro. I think you can get an idea of the influence of Ebony magazine in the title of Ebony, which means the same thing. Ebony is ebony in Portuguese. But neither of the previous two publications lasted beyond a few issues, which makes Raça Brasil's 25 years of success something to celebrate. That's not to say the magazine hasn't faced its own challenges. In the last decade, I got the distinct feeling that Hassa was experiencing some problems. Being a monthly magazine, I wondered what was going on maybe 5 or 6 years ago when the magazine would go to 2 to 3 months without publishing a new issue. Then maybe 4 or 5 years ago, the magazine seemed to have changed its name to Afro-Brazil for a short period. Now, I haven't been able to ascertain the facts for what happened during this period, And I'm not absolutely sure if Raça Brasil and Afro-Brazil magazine were separate entities or one and the same under different names. Originally published by Símbolo and then Escala, the magazine came to be published by Minuano in 2015, which was coincidentally the same publisher of Afro-Brazil. The format and style of the two magazines seemed identical, so at least in my eyes, Hassa and Afro were the same magazine. I also came to see this conclusion, or better yet, I also came to this conclusion because of the fact that during the months in which Afro-Brazil was being sold, I didn't see any new issues of Raça Brasil. Whatever the case was, the magazine either re-emerged under its original title or returned to publishing monthly issues. Raça Brasil represented the emergence of a Black voice in Brazil's media. The magazine opened a door for the development of Black communities in the now defunct Orchid social network in 2004, and later the rise of Afro-Brazilian blogs and websites. Hassa never did and still doesn't represent any sort of Black revolution, as its outlook presents more of a better positioning of Black Brazilians within a system of white supremacy rather than any sort of Black nationalist thought. In many ways, I would argue that other Afro-Brazilian media outlets that have come out online since the debut of Hassa, sites such as Guedes, Mundo Negro, and Alma Preta, have surpassed the influence of Raça Brasil magazine. But I would say that the success of these sites probably wouldn't have been possible without the trailblazing path opened by Hassa. As such, I congratulate the makers of the magazine for giving a face and a voice to an Afro-Brazilian population that simply didn't exist on Brazil's newsstands before 1996. In the piece below, the magazine's content creators celebrated its 25 years of existence. It's kind of cool because I noted that they chose the original issue of Hassa appeared in September of 1996. And that left, on the right of this picture, you see on the left, you see actress Isabel Filarges. They chose the same woman to celebrate the 25 years of the same magazine. So in its first issue published in 1996, Hassa sold 270,000 copies and became a phenomenon for Black Brazilians. The longest running Black communication vehicle in Brazil has reached its 25th anniversary. In this issue, Raça Brasil enters a restricted club of organizations of written press with such longevity. It's been 25 years of struggle, stamina, empowerment, having to prove to a market that has always distrusted the potential of Obama's famous phrase, "Yes, we can." On Wednesday evening, Hassa magazine celebrated its 25th anniversary with a cocktail party for guests and a video interview with actress and singer Isabel Filarges, which will be published on Hassa's social networks and website. The moment also marks the beginning of a partnership between the magazine, Vivo, and the Terra website, which will integrate the content published on Hassa's website to the spaces on the portal. The exclusive interview with Filarges, who appeared on the very first cover of the magazine in September 1996, also marks her return to the world of music after having suffered from tongue cancer. The actress is on the cover of the printed edition that celebrates a quarter of a century of the magazine. In the interview, she talks details about her professional trajectory in the last 25 years, the challenges in her career, about motherhood, shares her world vision, and even leaves a message for young Black people who want to enter the world of the arts. Raça Brasil magazine contributed to the Black aesthetic empowerment by launching a nationally prominent print vehicle that put Black people in the spotlight. The history of Hassa is mixed up with the history of Black women and Black men and women in the last 25 years in Brazil and in the world. And all of this is registered in our pages, from the struggles for quotas in universities and the denialism of Brazil's false racial democracy. From the joy of seeing the first Black man in the Brazilian Supreme Court, Joaquim Barbosa, to the rise and fall of Celso Pitta, the first Black mayor of the largest metropolis in the country, Sao Paulo. We are outraged by the still unsolved murder of Rio City Councilwoman Marielle Franco, the massacres and murders of young Black people in the Brazilian suburbs, but we are also thrilled with Dr. Jaqueline Goes, a Black woman from Bahia, the scientist who was the first to decode the DNA of the new coronavirus in record time in the world. Also registered in our pages is the girl Daiane dos Santos, the first Brazilian world champion in gymnastics when she won the gold medal in the floor gymnastics in Anaheim, California in 2003. With Hassa, also emerged a legion of new Black artists who appeared for the first time on the cover of a national magazine because of Hassa magazine. The sounds of pagode that won over the streets and bars of our city was enhanced on our covers that had singers such as Nichinho de Paula, Tiaguinho, Alexandre Pires, among others. The phenomenon Raça Brasil was the object of studies and master's and doctoral degrees in Brazil as well as abroad. And speaking of abroad, also registered on our covers was the most powerful Black couple in the world, Michelle and Barack Obama. It would be difficult to talk about everything, including the Black empowerment in these last 10 years. So we decided to present on this cover the woman who represents the change in these 25 years. The 25th anniversary of Raça Brasil is the starting point for a new phase. Strong in the print segment, the magazine will now reinforce its digital content with investments in its portal and streaming platforms, bringing diversified content and maintaining its commitment to the show of diversity of the Black population on a national as well as global scale. Actress Isabel Filarges, the cover girl on the first issue of our Hassa magazine, is the living example in her speeches that today we are more secure, more confident, more mature, and ready to occupy the place that has always been rightfully ours. So if you like this article, if you like this material, feel free to check out more of the videos on the channel, and I'm trying to get up as many as I can. Also feel free to go to the website where this content comes from. The site is called Black Brazil Today. You'll find it at blackbraziltoday.com. And I hope to see you following this YouTube channel for some time to come. And as I said, I'm looking forward to creating more content. So if you learned anything today, if you liked anything today, definitely feel free to click that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and also hit that little bell to get you so you can get notifications when I put up new videos. So with that said, I'm going to end this video here, and look forward to seeing you all in the next video.